Welcome, Karyn.
Welcome, Kim.
Now, some of our regular listeners may be thinking, now, wait a second. I can tell these two white women's voices apart perfectly, and I know that this is not how these introductions usually go. And you're right. You're right. We're changing things up a little bit today.
Yeah.
I mentioned at the beginning of this season that I wanted to flip the script, ask you a couple questions about your process, examine what it means to be an amateur genealogist of low ancestry.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to do that today. We're going to dive into your process. We're going to talk about your connection to your family, to your ancestry. We're going to talk about why you love doing this, why you tolerate me being here.
Yep. And
we're going to get to know you. Now,
something every listener has been asking for, banging on my door.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The people want to know. It's all about personality now, you know? It's about the connection that we make on social media. In unprecedented times like I can't get into that. How are you feeling about being in the spotlight?
Normally, fans of just me will know.
And I would imagine the crossover is pretty.
Yeah, fans of just me, and by that I mean my friends, know that I love attention.
Yes.
A lot of what I do is to procure that for myself.
Yes.
So normally that would feel really great.
Mm-hmm.
Lately, that hasn't quite been the case. We live in unprecedented times.
In unprecedented times like these,
I am less inclined to want that attention.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see how today goes. It could be a mixed bag.
I think it's going to be great.
Thank you.
I want to know more about you. The same way that you're diving into my horrifying ancestry to get to know me.
Yeah.
I'm going to just ask you what you do.
The reality is that you probably know most of what you're going to ask me. Is that correct?
Well, I'm going to feign interest as if I don't.
Okay, good.
And that's how you make content. Now, we're going to make this easy on you. Those of you watching can see that we are enjoying some courage beverages right now.
Yeah.
And that is watered down Jim Beam to keep on theme.
Yeah.
And
that's what it looks like, isn't it?
It really is what it looks like, which is kind of gross. And the other thing we're going to be doing is starting with a warm-up of sorts.
Okay.
Now, we are in the middle of season 2, which is about my ancestry. And in the first episode of season 2, I believe I rounded it out by acknowledging some of the things that I've inherited from my family, which includes a deep love of limited edition things.
Right.
And special flavors, which is why we went to the Bourbon Trail. It's why every year on my birthday, my parents bring me some sort of treat of a fancy flavor. Yesterday was my birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This is not about me.
Sure.
But it is about Post Malone.
Oh, no. You mean Ghost Malone?
I mean Ghost Malone. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the limited edition Post Malone Oreos.
Oh, my God.
They are Posties swirled salted caramel and shortbread flavor cream.
This is going to be an auditory nightmare.
It's going to be, well, only for a little bit. And that's why Ben is going to do a really great job of editing.
Yeah. If I'd known this, I wouldn't have eaten my pre-Post Malone Oreos.
Well, I couldn't warn you. Otherwise, I would have ruined the surprise.
I've already had 2 Oreos.
Okay. So, there's a smell.
A bad smell?
It's strong. I think it's okay. I'm going to try not to talk too much while I'm doing plastic. We're going to be trying these live on camera.
Oh, very caramely.
Yes. So again, they are salted caramel and shortbread flavor cream. I believe they also have
little guitars on them.
Guitar picks, guitars, butterflies, potentially.
Look at that guy
on there. Wait, let's beauty blog it. Is this good content?
Is this good?
Cheers. Thank you for being here on the day after my birthday.
Thank you. We're going to give that content away for free?
It can go on the Patreon. Talk to me.
I've tasted this before.
Have you?
But from what? I couldn't say.
Okay.
It's a very familiar flavor.
The filling is very familiar.
Yeah.
It's good.
It tastes like something they used to put out after Sunday school at my church before the service. I don't remember what it was, but I'm having a flashback. I just got out of Sunday school. We're going to eat these cookies and drink church coffee. and then go to the main service.
I'm getting,
which I'm sure is what Post was going for.
almost certainly. I'm getting childhood.
Yeah, definitely childhood.
Yeah. Listen, I don't hate them.
I don't hate it. So are those scales on the package or picks?
These are guitar picks.
Ooh.
But if Post Malone was like, my brand is Dragon now, I could really get into that.
See that.
What would you rate them?
I would rate them a Post Malone going on Ghost Adventures episode out of 10.
I think I would rate them 3 dragons that Daenerys Targaryen gave birth to, or whatever she did.
That's too much, I think.
Maybe just 2 of them.
There's 2 of them, yeah.
I think they all die by the end. Spoiler alert for Game of Thrones. Karyn.
Yeah.
Let's start from the very beginning. How did we get here? And why do you love this thing that you love so much that torments you on a daily basis, which is...
Which part?
Life? No, let's talk about your interest in Ancestry.
Oh,
let's
okay.
start from the jump. You know, I've known you for some time now, and this is a fairly new hobby in the grand scheme of our friendship.
But
true. It's not new to your family. It's not new to your interests.
No. The fast answer is that I got into Ancestry the first time I got COVID, which I think was in early, like January 2021. First time I got COVID, I had all of this time just in bed, and I thought, now's the time to get that 14-day free trial from Ancestry. Sponsor me. And immediately I started spending like 8, 10, 12 hours a day going through Ancestry.com. And I knew that this was a little bit different than my other obsessions. And it took over. And a little bit about me, I flit from one thing to another often.
Mm-hmm.
I do a crop rotation of passions.
To borrow a phrase.
1 minute it's cross stitching. 1 minute it's, what do I do? Puzzles?
Puzzles?
Yeah.
Tabletop games?
Tennis? No.
Tabletop tennis.
Tabletop games.
You play kickball?
Kickball. Yeah, I go through a plethora of things that I get really hyper focused about for just a little bit, and then I quit. I thought that would be the same with genealogy. It's not the same. It's stuck.
Why though?
Because Kim.
Do you know?
I think yeah, but I think it's more complicated than one answer. I think part of it, like the shallow answer, is that it is the greatest puzzle to put together of all time. Once you find that right piece and you put it in its perfect little slot on your family tree, there's a euphoria in that. So that's the shallow answer. I think the deeper answer is that, no, actually there's 3 levels to this. So
good, let's go.
The shallow answer is that it's a really fun puzzle.
That's like the cookie.
That's the cookie.
Yeah.
So the middle level is that I love storytelling, and genealogy is just like being a voyeur into the stories of a bunch of people's lives. Love that. And then lastly, which I've talked about before, is my fear of dying in obscurity.
Sure.
And when I look at other ordinary people who have died that nobody's really talking about, and I look at them and I find their story and I think about their story, I feel a little less frightened that nobody will do the same for me. So it's a 3-layered cake of interest.
Shortbread, salted caramel, Post Malone, Oreo.
Thank you. Yes. And that is why it's different from cross-stitching.
Sure. Right. Now, do you feel like your motivations shift over time in terms of like who's sort of propelling you forward at any given moment? Like sometimes are you more propelled by the Sherlock Holmes clue finding versus the, feeling of existential whatever?
Yeah, I think that's probably the main thing that propels me in the moment. But the thing that propelled this podcast would be the others. The fact that I was finding out all of this gorgeous information, these really exciting stories that would not exist in the world if I didn't tell them, that propels how I write these episodes, why I'm doing this podcast.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting time in modern history to be diving into the past. 2021
Yeah.
was an interesting year.
Why?
Well, 2020 is the big one, right? That
It's the
everybody's
big
like,
one,
oh,
yeah.
2020, everything's been different since. But 2021 was no easy feat.
No, certainly not.
We had a couple false starts where
Yeah.
we thought, we did it.
I mean, the vaccine didn't come around until like June that year, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So how did you feel at the time? And I guess, how do you feel now? Although now, we've spoken pretty openly about how you feel about the history of this country and what we're going through currently. How did you feel at the time while you were discovering all of these stories from the past in relation to what was happening around you in your community, in the nation, at large? Was there a sense of, I need to talk about where we've been so that we can figure out how to exist in the here and now? Or did that take a little bit to build up?
It took a little bit because originally it was just fun to do. And it really was not that deep. But then I would say the thing that changed for me, I remember two distinct moments where it changed for me pretty early on. And two of them I've already done episodes about, which is the Bartley Corbin episode and our Pierre Chastain, the Huguenot episode. So Bartley Corbin, we talked about, participated pretty flagrantly in the Trail of Tears. And that I don't think I expected something so blatant to pop up, which now I understand that as a white American with like pretty deep roots in this country, as in like my ancestors have been in the country for quite a long time, that's just going to show up. And that's going to be for anybody, any white American.
Everyone.
But I don't think I knew that. I don't think I understood that. I thought, well, we're from New York. I know I have a Southern branch, but I'm sure it's not that crazy. And then when I saw that so blatant, so flagrant, I was really taken aback by that, that I was a part of the darkest, not me specifically, but that my ancestry and where I came from was so directly involved in the darkest chapters of our history that I knew about, that intellectually I made the connection of our country did this, that was bad. But on a like body level, on like a heart level, I had not really made that connection to myself. And then the second time was in the story of Pierre Chastain, who was a Huguenot that basically was booted all around Europe for being a Protestant. He was definitely a refugee, reviled for his belief system, and came to Virginia as an oppressed person. And then I saw the paper that said the governor of Virginia gives 10,000 acres of mannequin land to the Huguenots, and his name was on it. And so then there was a piece of paper directly telling me how I had benefited from the stealing of land from Native people. So after living through 2020 and then going through this process in 2021 with my family history, I was making those heart connections to the things that I had learned in 2020, which we as a country, if you remember all the stuff that happened in 2020, we were really coming face to face with systemic racism and systems of oppression in this country because of what happened with George Floyd and the protests afterwards. And so I had made a lot of like ideological moves forward in understanding my place in that narrative and how I, as a white person, have gotten a lot of privilege from a system that was designed for me and not for other people in this country. So I knew all of that on an intellectual level and was working through a lot of my own like internal biases, like those, all of that. And then going through this, finally, like my heart made the connection of, no, this is like, didn't happen that long ago. This is your family specifically. This is not just a historical figure in a book. This is your family specifically that benefited from all of this horrifying oppression that is still affecting people to this day. So it really like helped me orient myself in this larger story. Orient myself in this larger story makes it sound like I'm centering myself. That's not what I mean.
We understand what you mean.
I mean, it helped me understand why it was important for me to recognize my place in that story.
Yeah. Well, and your responsibility, I think, because at that time, you were learning a lot about what you felt responsible for in terms of your position in this community. You wanted to show up to your community. And also, I do think, whether you're aware of it or not, there is a sense of responsibility to talk about these things on a large platform, because this is something that you feel so passionate about. It's something that you feel very comfortable with. It's something that you've put a lot of time and effort into. And while you did do yourself a little bit of a disservice by saying that you like attention, which is not the whole story, you also are deeply, deeply motivated to educate and to share and to let people in and to be vulnerable with where you're at, so that people who exist on other levels with their understanding and their feelings and their beliefs can feel safe with you. And so I think that it makes perfect sense that was the time when you were like, it's now, this thing is sticking. And also like, this could be a huge thing that I do to like give myself in history and like something to the world.
Yeah.
Which is pretty impressive. And to be honest, a little bit surprising, because I thought that there was more of a sense of a familial drive behind all of the genealogy thing. I thought that there was some sort of impetus of like, someone in your family asked you a question similar to I asked you, like, can you find out if we're related to the XYZ? And maybe that would have been the stem, the seed, the soul, what are other words that start with S?
I'm at a loss.
Okay, you know what I mean, though.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, can you talk about your connection to your family through genealogy, and if that was part of this, or if that came later, the deeper that you got?
In a way, it came before all of it. I've mentioned before that my grandma, she is known for being obsessed with genealogy. It's kind of her thing. And there's a whole room in my uncle's house that is just like floor to ceiling filing cabinets because she didn't do a lot of stuff on computers. She printed everything she did, which is so funny. But she was obsessed with it. And I remember when she first started getting into it, I was around 12 years old and I was at her house staying the night, and Ancestry.com just was like at the very beginning. It was like in its nascence. And I was helping her like start using Ancestry.com while she was going through like family start. Me at 12, like teaching my grandma to use the computer.
A tale as old as time.
A tale as old as time. And I remember they had so little stuff on Ancestry at that time. It was like I would look up anything and then be like, nope, not
nothing.
here. It's way different now. Again, sponsor me. But I would sit at her table with her and we'd fill out the little like family like sheets and things together. And I loved it. But because I was a kid and I had the attention span of a gnat, that didn't last for too long. But that was her thing. She would like travel all over the Eastern Seaboard to look for family stuff. And in a way, that sort of made me not go back to it for a long time after that, because it was her thing. And it wasn't until 2021 when like she's been winding down. She can't do it anymore because her mind has unfortunately gotten like much worse with like dementia. But I think part of it was I saw that she was winding down and I felt safer to like pick it up. Maybe safe's not the right word. She was very possessive of that as her like activity.
Sure.
I just felt like that was her thing. It didn't need to be my thing. Until later, it kind of caught me again. And I'm very much my grandma's granddaughter.
It's so interesting to me that that there's this sense of like grandma's unhealthy obsession, and the way that you talk about this sometimes is in the same way.
Whatever.
That it feels all consuming.
Yeah.
And like it is so, I mean, we've talked about this before and we'll get into it a little bit more, but you've talked about all of the time that you spend doing the research. It is not so simple as going on Ancestry, looking up a name and being like, copy paste.
Certainly not anymore.
How does it feel to have inherited this obsession And are you able to sort of balance that and whatever sort of stigma there may or may not be internally in your family with the joy that this thing brings you?
It didn't really make me feel weird that grandma was so obsessed with it. In fact, I actually kind of liked hearing the stories most of the time, if I remember correctly. I have gotten to a point in my life, which was not always the case, but it is the case now, that if a thing brings you joy and it doesn't harm other people, just go with it. Because I have spent a lot of time searching for passion, things that give me joy, things that make life move a little easier and feel like you're moving in a good direction. And it could be genealogy, it could be basket weaving. I don't care. It makes me happy to do it. And as long as it makes me happy to do it and it doesn't hurt anyone, I'm in it. I'm in it, baby.
You're in it, baby. It's nice to see you acknowledge that. And it's also something that I think I'm hearing a lot about from our listeners, our friends, our family. Sometimes one and the same, sometimes not. When I've described to people what we do, and I almost always say, it's yours, it's your passion project. I'm along for the chuckles and the stupidity. I very frequently mention that I've never seen my friend Karyn so deeply invested in something that is entirely hers. And that's really exciting to see. And it's yeah, I mean, sometimes it is all consuming. It's all you want to do. And also you then turn it into some beautiful product that you're giving to people. What a joy that is.
Yeah.
And that's really nice.
It is nice.
Would you say that your process as you started to move towards this being your endeavor, would you say that your process is inspired by how your grandmother used to approach it? Or, I mean, obviously the tools are very different.
Yeah, the tools are different, but also sometimes the same.
Also sometimes the same. I mean, did that kind of start you on this journey of like what steps you take to put a story together? Or were you able to approach it from, you've got a vast academic history and a lot of skills that you bring to the table. Where do you get your strategy when you're building a story like this in terms of how you're going to research, where you're going to look first?
I think there's actually like two different questions in there.
Yes.
One is like my
I'm
research.
good at that.
Yeah. One is like my research process. And the other is more along the lines of how I think about genealogy as a field or as a practice. When it comes to like how my grandma approached things and how I approach things from like an umbrella, like above the forest of the trees kind of approach, that doesn't make any sense. Do you know what I'm saying? Like from like a general like ideology,
Sure.
like philosophical approach,
Mhm.
maybe is a better way of putting it. She is from an older generation. I think that goes without saying. And I think her approach has always been that her ancestors could do no wrong. Even though she did once, when I talked to her about Bartley Corbin, she said, and I quote, "He was a real stinker, wasn't he?" And that's the most I've heard her say about it.
And that is pretty powerful.
He's a powerful,
Gotta say.
He's a real stinker.
Yeah.
It was a little bit more on the like side of traditional genealogy, which the way she approached it is very familiar to people in the field. It's this old style of the like genealogy as mythology of American history. Like the Mayflower migrants were gods among us.
Mhm.
Like
Brave explorers.
Brave explorers. Like the founding fathers were, just immortal. And I think I'm of course hyperbolizing, but it felt the same way. Like her approach was very American history as this really grand narrative that I just could never get behind.
Even when you were little?
I suppose, yeah, but I don't think I ever fully felt that way about people in history necessarily. Even though I loved history, I think I always thought of like historical figures as people and always wanted to humanize them. there's probably like history notebooks with me like writing fan fiction about history,
which is about who specifically?
Which is just historical fiction, probably.
You call it fan fiction,
but in a way, historical fan fiction.
You're George Washington Carver's #1 fan. Eli Whitney Cotton Gin, anybody?
Yeah, we got you.
Mm-hmm.
However, my approach, my ideological philosophical approach to genealogy has been a lot more, these are real people, complicated, messy lives. I don't have to believe that they were good or make excuses for them just because they're in my tree. And I'm actually even more excited to think about them as like fallen creatures or just like regular folks who make mistakes than she was wont to do. But the second part of that question, which is the research process.
Yeah.
It's not too dissimilar from how she would do it, but I obviously am much more tech savvy than she ever was. I always start with Ancestry.com. Sponsor me.
Sponsor us.
And also, I'm always willing to share my Ancestry tree because that's where my main tree is. So if you ever want like to see that, DM us or email us. But I start there. I get the basics. And then I immediately always go to newspaper.com. Sponsor us. Because newspapers are where the stories are. That's where most of like my gory details come from. Not all, but a lot of gory details come from newspapers. And if newspapers.com doesn't have it, every state usually has their own archive of newspapers. Every town, like there's this website called Advantage Archives that is a company that helps like local libraries put newspapers on their own archive as like a part of their big system so that they can put them on their server. And so there's just so many different places that have all these little like secret hidden gems. I'll use Family Search for they have all the microfilm records. So if it's not digitized on Ancestry, it might be an image on Family Search. That one's hard because you have to look at all the individual images. Very time consuming. And also there's a lot of websites like that have old court records for Virginia. The Library of Virginia has this really great project where you can type in names of like the county you're looking for and it'll show you all of these like court records that the person appeared in. And then if that all fails, you go to the location.
You're going to say you make it up.
You make it up. No, then you go to the location and you go to their libraries and you go to their historical societies and you find what they have and you talk with people.
Mm-hmm. So it's involved.
Very much so.
So when people say, oh, I love Ancestry, I have been making a family tree.
Yeah.
It's not, that's only the beginning.
Yeah, I spit on those people. No, I'm just kidding.
You say it's always been really interesting to me that you chose the phrase amateur genealogist because this is a study for you more so than a hobby. And the study of genealogy is so much more complex than I think just simply being like, this is my family tree.
Yeah.
And, the amount of research that you're doing is really elevated, which I think is very impressive. But it also makes me wonder if maybe that's how the patriot myth and the sort of like grandiosity of American history is still so prevalent, is because that is what can be baked into like surface level history. Whereas if you have media literacy and if you have the ability to look at a resource and go, wait a minute, or like you've said you've done before, looking at a family tree and being like, wait a minute, this doesn't line up. Are you then more likely to find the actual truth, the actual humanity of everything rather than just the big stories and how does media literacy play into your research? How often are you coming across sources that you either don't trust or that you're able to debunk or that feel like they have some sort of spin that you don't trust? Because we know I have a lot of problems with that.
Yeah.
I love to not trust somebody.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's just my own gut. And, we're working on it. But what does that look like for you when you're researching and you come across something that feels a little hinky?
Well, a lot of it feels hinky because, as you've so poignantly pointed out, we can't rely on whoever is narrating. And that just is a part of it. So while there's two pieces of this. There's the first piece, which is like there are sources where we study genealogy or find records that might not be reputable, or you can't trust them as a primary source. For example, GeniaNet or WikiTree, which are these like community built like world family trees. And while I think they're right a lot of the time, there's also times where this idea of like a wishful link without the source gets perpetuated over and over again, so that it's now in like the internet record so many times that it's hard to dig past it. So certainly there's that aspect to it. And then there's the aspect of what we've touched on before, which is who's telling the story. So the newspaper, like I said, is where I get so many of my stories. Well, we know that there weren't a lot of female journalists for a very, very long time. So these are stories written by men. They're stories written by people who are educated enough to write and have a job at a newspaper. So they're telling stories in the way that they want to. So you always have to read between the lines. But that's why it's so good to have like multiple perspectives and to read between the lines of all those perspectives. What is that phrase that everyone says? There's two sides. There's three sides to every story. There's like
yours, mine, and the truth.
Yeah. And I think it's like the triangulation of all of the sources. The truth is in the middle somewhere. And the last part of the work that I do on this podcast is the conjecture of how those all line up. But that's any investigative work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's detective work. That's investigative journalism. That's every work has to do that, where they find all of the evidence and then they have to like triangulate the truth from that evidence, knowing that some of the narratives are unreliable.
Yeah. Well, and we've talked about the reliability of primary versus secondary sources. Mm-hmm. I'm curious how many sources you feel like you need generally in order to feel like something is true or believable. Like, is there a certain number of newspaper articles or like firsthand accounts that you feel like you strive for in order to find some sort of sense of like, okay, I think this is really real? Or does it sort of depend on what's being presented to you?
It depends. If it's a story from like a book on like the ancestry of the Johnsons in America that was written in 1901 by like a genealogist from that time, and he says that the Johnsons are descended from Charlemagne, I'm going to question it.
Of course.
Because of what genealogists were saying in that time, the way that they were constantly wishful linking, and how old the source is. Like, there's just like a lot of different things to that. But then there's other times where it's like written on a birth record or a court document that's a little less disputable. It's still possibly disputable, but it's a little less so.
So it really depends on time period as well as like amount of information.
Everything is contextual.
Yeah.
That's life, isn't it?
I wish we had one of those, like the more you know rainbows. Ben, can you do that in editing? I don't understand how you have the patience for it, if I'm honest.
Yeah, it's surprising, isn't it? Because
not because of you, but because of how long all of this can take. I mean, you're doing searching and reading and searching and scrubbing and clipping and what, like this is a labor of love.
Is love the word?
This is a labor of desperation.
Thank you.
But it's very impressive to me that you're willing to go that far and you're willing to question even your excitement if you see something where you're like, this is my big break, this is my answer, to have the steadiness of mind to be like, are we sure? And not just chase that, as you've said before, sweet high. Is that something that's gotten easier over time?
No, I'm still chasing that sweet high.
Yes, but I mean, to stop yourself from believing something too soon or from buying into something too soon.
No, I'm constantly still doing it.
Yeah, okay, great.
I'm better about like trying to back it up. Yeah. But I mean, the moment I see something, it's actually, maybe it's gotten worse because now that I have a podcast behind me, I'm like, what will make a good story? Whereas before I had the podcast, I was like, this is really cool, and then just moved on. Now it's like, this is really cool. What a great episode this would make. I hope it's real. And there's actually more to it of me wanting a really good story in order to get those viral hits.
Those sweet TikTok views.
Yeah, I need
that
those.
count
I
for
need those
so much.
likes.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Very interesting. What are some of the biggest breaks that you've had? What are some of the moments you've had that make you feel the most like, oh my gosh, I've done it?
Well, the one that was the most crazy was from our Dine episode. This is one of those moments where I went on family search and was in the tiny Belgian town that my third great grandfather came from in their birth records. And I didn't even know, maybe I did know the exact year, but I had to look through every single birth record from that year in French, in old-timey script.
It's wild.
And I had to look at each one individually, like hundreds of pages, not even knowing if it existed, not even knowing for sure that I was in the right town. And when I saw it, I lost my mind. And then to see it and see that it said so much on, if we remember from the episode, Augustine was born a bastard and they wrote it on his birth certificate. His father's name isn't even on there. And then the name of his grandfather was the name of the father that he gave all his life. And I just, from there was like a domino effect of incredible information that I found about that. That was the most intoxicating out of any story ever. That's the biggest one. But really, anytime I find the name of a parent that I didn't have before, so I can like continue the tree, it's a really exciting time. Anytime I find a newspaper story or a like court document of something salacious, that's very exciting to me. I love gossip.
Yeah,
you
sure.
know that.
I do know this.
Or if the National Archives, if you have like an ancestor who fought for the Union and they have a pension, just sometimes they would interview everyone who knew you for affidavits. And
wow.
So there's like affidavits from the year 1900 of everyone remembering everything they knew about this one person.
Wow.
Those feel like a really big breakthrough when you read them.
Okay. And I have to ask, because I have to do my due diligence as an interviewer. What are some of the biggest letdowns you've had?
What do you mean by letdown?
Like biggest crushing blows of finding out that something you thought was true wasn't actually true.
Oh, I was pretty bummed that you weren't related to Jim Beam.
Me too. It's delicious.
I just thought it'd be really cool and like something we could share together. But that didn't happen.
Okay, so you have your big breaks. You have your big letdowns. What's one of your white whales? Who are you chasing? What are you dying to know that you just have not been able to round up quite yet?
There's definitely a few. And ones I've talked about, which is Angeline. I love Angeline. She has just always captured me. Just the fact that like people talk about her, but as far as like records are concerned, she was almost a ghost. And I want to know so much more about her, but I just don't know as much as I want to. Next, John Connis's parents. I still keep thinking and hoping that there's a record out there that exists. And actually, if there's anyone who works on like Long Island or Queens or like New York City historical work, if you know of records from the Long Island Farms orphanage, I keep hoping that those just exist somewhere in like a dusty like filing cabinet, because I think there's something there, but I really want to find his parents. And then there's actually my name Harding. I can't find their origin. There's a very famous colonist that came over to New England named Harding that everyone has put our line to like lead up to. But my grandma was one of the first people that I knew of who was like, no, I don't think that we belong to that Harding, or if we do, nobody has found where it connects. So there's like a point in the line where we just can't get further than, and it's always been a bit of a brick wall. So That's another one, bit more boring, but
Wow.
yeah.
That's exciting though, to think that like this will never, I mean, for as long as your obsession holds out, but also for as long as records are still available, like you're never going to have an end to what you're going to be searching for.
Yeah.
Which is simultaneously awful.
Well, it's kind of Sisyphean in a way.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
It's very like, give me the dopamine.
Yeah.
No, you can't have it.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of thrilling.
I think so. And honestly, more records come out all the time. There's like Ancestry is constantly saying like, oh, we've got a whole collection of like millions of documents that we just put on. Local historical societies are often like, they're the last ones to like catch up to the digitization. They're doing that. Just the other day, Family Search, sponsor us. Just the other day, I was telling you, I used for the first time, Family Search has like this AI like full text search mode that they have it in beta right now. And and basically you can put in the name of the person you're looking for and it will search handwritten texts for the name, which
cool.
If you know old documents, that feels impossible to do with like their flowy cursive.
Mm-hmm.
But it was possible. And I found records that I've never seen before because I haven't meticulously gone through every single like bit of image on the Family Search website. So every day.
Pretty cool, but also important to note, if you're using AI tools, know that they're not always accurate. Always double check your facts. Double check your facts. Let's get into the next part, which is maybe my favorite part.
Okay.
Well, my favorite part, as we all know, is when you reference other things that are happening in the year X when we start our stories. But that's not part of the family tree. That's not part of the ancestry. That's you crafting a narrative.
Yeah.
Which is one of my favorite things that you do that I personally think you do extremely well. How do you do it?
Wait, okay, which part? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the cold opens, the ways that you can kind of create an actual scene. You're not just giving me like, these are the facts. You're tying things together. One of the best examples of this, I think, was the episode that we did with our friend Kathleen, where we talked about Castellou Hardy Gardens.
Yeah.
And the incredible display that they had at whatever fair it was. The way that you describe these things, it does feel not only like you're just really enjoying being creative, but it also feels like you are trying to do justice to the lives of these people who are living, breathing, flawed humans.
Yeah.
So what compelled you to turn all of this research into something that could be presented in the way that, you know, a painting or a picture is?
I don't know any other way, I think is the answer. Because before I am a researcher, I am a storyteller.
Yes.
And I don't know how to not do that. And actually, something to know about me is that I have been making up stories ever since like my first memories. If I was in school, if I was in church, I was probably not listening. I'm like, I would like, for example, I loved my grandma's church because there were these like light fixtures that were really like huge at the top of a really tall ceiling that I would look up and I'd be like, wow, those look like really cool, like tree houses for tiny people that live in the church and come out when we're not there. And then like during the whole church service, I would just make up a story about how I lived amongst the people in the light chandelier. Seeing something like a light fixture and then making an entire story around it was something that came pretty naturally to me. And I never stopped as I grew up. I believe TikTok calls it maladaptive daydreaming. Others call it ADHD, whatever.
Thanks, Dr. TikTok.
Finding all these facts about people, getting glimpses of who they were in real life is just like a writing prompt.
Mm.
It's like, here's one, like, here's your first sentence of your writing prompt. Now go write the rest of the story.
Mm-hmm.
To be fair, I do try to make it as factual as possible. The cold opens, I take a lot of liberties with. Everyone knows. They're always based on something real.
Yeah, but they're a little flowery.
They're a little flowery.
Yeah.
Like the Kilmer episode, for example, where it started where he's like hawking medicines on the street. That is not a real scene, but that is, something that was happening. I mean, the Kilmers were doing a lot of guerrilla marketing for their product and people loved it and were clamoring for it. So yes, I am taking a lot of liberties with the cold opens, but the rest of the episodes, I try to keep it pretty factual, but also tell it in a way that feels like their lives are a full picture rather than just like little snippets of facts.
I want to give a shout out to the Kilmer episodes because those are still to date some of my favorites we've ever made. But I do think the Kilmer episode is so luscious because there's so much creativity that they were doing, like creative ads for Swamp Root. Like it was just, there was so much more context that we were able to get, which really gave me a thrill. Yeah. And it was quite a ride.
We were extra silly.
We're extra silly.
When we were doing
We're not normally very silly.
No, never.
No, never. I was going to ask a little bit about your history with storytelling, but you touched on something that you've told me before, which I just think is the cutest thing ever, which is, how often you were spending time like curled up in a little like podium while your mom was teaching, like making stories in your head. Does that make you feel connected to life? Or is it sort of a way to escape,
probably.
Yeah.
I mean, well, in the scenarios where I'm doing it, it's, during classes, during church, like all of that. Or like when I was trying to fall asleep, I would do it a lot. I mean, those are places where I was like, this is boring. I would rather be anywhere but here, especially in my small town, in my very small world. And I just believed that my life should be much bigger. The stories helped me feel like it was bigger. That ties into my attachment to genealogy and wanting all of these ordinary people's lives to be bigger than what they are, in the hopes that my life will be bigger than what it is. So that's where it comes from generally. It certainly doesn't make me feel more attached to real life.
Does it make you feel separated ever from the people that you're studying in genealogy to then try to like imagine them in the time? Does it make them feel, we've talked before about, we talked on the Viking episode about how with enough distance, with enough time between me and an ancestor, you and your ancestors, people stop feeling like people. To me, they feel like
characters,
fantasy characters. Yeah, it feels like folklore. And it's so interesting going between this feeling of like, oh, we have factual data, they're real, they were alive, like they had personality traits, they were, assessed by the penitentiary, to go from that to then try to imagine like the smaller, finer details. Sometimes it does make me as a listener forget that they were just like very ordinary people. But I think maybe that's the point, despite, in some ways it might seem hypocritical because of how hard we come down on the Patriot myth.
Yeah.
But there is this sense of like the fantasy that we craft around these people. Like it makes them more alive, and it also makes them feel like, just like acknowledges the space that they took up. Space they took up.
In a way, they still take it.
Or I guess that's what we're hoping for.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel like these are just characters? Or do you feel like, I mean, one of the things that I think you've done that's very cool is, our resonance of tying this to your life as it is currently. But does that become blurry sometimes?
Well, if I could circle back to maladaptive daydreaming.
Yeah, let's spend a little more time there.
Well, I guess I don't know the real definition of it. But I would say the characters in the stories in my head would become very real to me. Doing the inverse of that and finding real people and making them into characters, I guess doesn't make it any less real for me. I think that's a me problem of like of just blurring the lines of reality and narrative, because I love to romanticize. I love to make a story that I do it in my own life. I look at the things in my life, the choices I've made, the paths I've taken, sometimes very narratively, very romantically. And in real life, as we know, isn't really like that. There aren't always like neatly tied endings. People will make a big mistake and then come back from it and then make another big mistake. And there's no like, this is the one climax of problems. And then we tie up the story. People in history were exactly the same way. And for these episodes and the way that I think about them, I do try to write these stories in like a recognizable narrative structure. But I think it's an important thing to remember that while generally I have like here's the climax, we tie up the story, these people's lives were one like little story here, another story here, a problem here, a problem there. And I think I actually always take it on the like narrative side more than I take it on the factual side. Wait, is that discrediting me? Am I discrediting myself?
You might be.
Okay, cool.
But you have a tendency to do that when it's not even called for. So,
but I think it's a little bit true. I mean, I have facts to back up my episodes.
Yes, of course.
But I think about them very romantically.
Yeah. Does that leave room then for bias potentially?
Oh, everyone has bias.
Well, sure. But I guess, do you find yourself checking that in the moment, or do you find yourself with I would imagine with some stories, the way that we've talked about them, there's certainly more bias injected into our conversation. Do you find that certain historical accounts of people in your family line have led you to insert more bias in the narratives that you're writing?
Sometimes, but I actually don't actually think of that as inherently bad.
Okay. I don't either.
Okay, great. I think that, yeah, just inserting myself, my experience, my bias is not inherently a bad thing. However, it's my responsibility to make sure that I'm not stating what isn't fact and what is in fact my opinion as fact. So I think when I go through these episodes, when we go through them, I think we do a pretty good job of saying like, here's what we know for sure. And then here's what I think this means. And I think that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I think so too.
Great. Do you want to fight about it?
Yes, I do. Because my next question, are there any stories that you've written for the pod that you would like to revisit with a different lens? Anything that we've talked about where you think, you know what, there's a lot more I should have talked about, or there are things that I included that I didn't need to, in regards to either things that felt too personal or not personal enough, or that felt too sort of like filled with bias? It's okay if the answer is no. If it is no,
everything I've done is perfect.
I'm just wondering if anything stands out. There is a big conversation that we have with each other about like senses of privacy, from how close to us is too close to be talking about on the podcast, how close is too close to be talking about without consulting other existing living generations in the family.
Yeah.
And the same can be said with a lot of things that we're going to talk about with my family. Like, is there stuff that's going to be kind of salacious that might be too much too soon, or can we just let it go and say it exists and it's real and we got to just talk about it how we talk about it?
Yeah, obviously there's like a balance to all of it. We've had this conversation in so much as like I'm acutely aware that my mom listens to every episode. Hey, Mom.
Hi.
And so in a way, whenever I write stories for the podcast, when we talk during the podcast, when we edit them, I'll often have my mom imaginarily like sitting next to me as I do it to see if I'm saying anything too out of pocket. I think having your mom in your head constantly is something most people can relate to.
Not me.
No, not you at all.
No way.
So there is that sense, but also I don't want to totally censor myself or censor us, and be okay with saying things that could possibly make others uncomfortable. I don't think I have any regrets about how we've presented the episodes that I've had before, other than I know we've pulled a lot of punches when talking about hard topics. We do address them to some extent, but some topics like privilege, the Trail of Tears, Stolen Land, Oppression. There's a lot of things in there that I pull punches in two parts because I don't always feel qualified to talk about it. And I'm very nervous to say something that is wrong or is hurtful, isn't helpful. And so while I desperately want to present these stories in a way that is like a useful conversation for people to have, I'm also very acutely aware that I'm not always the most competent one to be having that conversation.
Yeah, we've spoken, I think, twice now about how nervous I feel about this season of the podcast, because I think I'm going to be facing a lot of things in my family history that I really need to examine and that are going to inform my understanding of my place in the world today. Again, we're not centering ourselves. Quite the opposite if we can help it.
Yeah.
But I do think that we both are trying to sort of balance this innate feeling of rightness and wrongness that is quite heightened, especially right now at this time in the world, with a feeling of like, we want to talk about it, but it's not our place to say like, you are right or wrong if you believe in XYZ, or if you agree with us, or if you don't. Ideally, we want to be presenting these facts to people who like might not be aware of them. I know we did a personal update episode a couple weeks ago that I have a lot of people in my life who love me who had no idea how bad things were for you in your position, what you went through, and then also what other federal workers are going through. It's not about trying to persuade. It's certainly not about trying to call out to some degree, but it is about talking about it and putting it in front of us and saying, you can't hide this. You can't turn away from it. You can't try to, smooth it over as something more presentable and digestible. Like, you need to really look at something and check with yourself, see how you feel about it once it's out in the open, see how you feel about, how am I going to feel sharing the podcast with people knowing full well that members of my family owned slaves. I have to not be afraid of that. I have to be willing to own it, admit to it, and be able to talk about the repercussions of that on like a huge scale, but also like how it's informed where I am now and what I owe to other people as a result of that. And I think that you've done a really, really good job of trying to walk that line of informing without isolating, without alienating other people. That said, you girls got hot takes.
Yeah, we all do.
And this is a very different year than last year.
Yes.
And as you acknowledged in your personal update, the way that you interact with the world and with history is going to change a good bit. Personally, I'm thrilled for that because I think that you are very smart and capable and you do a lot of due diligence when it comes to being informed. But I get it.
To touch on what you were talking about with the upcoming season for yourself, and something that when I first started doing my own family tree that I had to be intentional about for myself was, if you find something uncomfortable, don't shy away from it. Sit in that discomfort. It's too easy to look at something uncomfortable, put it away, and just go on with your life. And that would be much easier. But things that make you uncomfortable are the things that are going to grow you. They're the things that are going to help you be a better community member. And especially when it comes to learning about your past as a white person in this country, as a white family in this country, sit in that discomfort. And it's a discomfort that, I mean, we've had the privilege of not being uncomfortable for so long, while people of color have had to live in constant discomfort and pain and oppression. And it's the literal least we can do to look at that. And I think the counter argument is always, well, I didn't do it. The past is the past. Just like, we don't need to constantly like self-flagellate. That's the word, right? Just self-flagellate over and over and over again. And to that I say, maybe we do. And the systems have not gone away. If anything, the systems are having a nice little reswing back in the wrong direction. The fact that a lot of people don't want to sit with that discomfort, who look at current systems of oppression and then decry them as DEI and want to eradicate any sense of real history of this country, what we really did, they are making our community so much worse for the people who are already having to suffer for those actions, not for those of us who have never had to sit in that discomfort. And I think like not being willing to be uncomfortable is the reason that we have a far right movement. Not being willing to be uncomfortable with hard conversation is the reason that young men are more likely to be conservative and misogynist than ever before. If I could get any message across, being uncomfortable is a place of growth and to not shy away from it. Also, as far as like last year being a better year for me, being more diplomatic and like less hot takey, being a little less
Hot
likely to
takeys
have
and-
like a super hot take. I'll admit I'm in a different place this year. I feel really upset with the way that things are right now. And I feel angry. I feel ready to point fingers and make things worse. The outcome that I want is for the people in my community to feel safe, to know that myself and the people that I'm around are doing the hard work to dismantle what we've been taught, to build spaces for them, to make them feel included, loved, and safe.
You know, this is so annoying because I was going to do a whole like, what's your resonance? And you just did it because you're such a good writer that you just wrote in the moment.
I wrote in the moment.
But I will ask the big question. We are watching you in real time, as well as me a little bit, but you know, I'm dumber, so it's not happening on such a big scale. We're watching you in real time challenge a lot of what you have been taught, what you know, what you thought was true for a long time. And we'll do that as well as we continue through season 2. For me, you talk about your own legacy. You talk about your own fear of slipping away and being forgotten. But I think putting your growth out in stages like this, you know, the listeners aren't going to know everything about the ways that you're growing and changing, but they're going to see it over time because of what we're researching and talking about, and also because of the world and how it is. Does that feel like a legacy to you? And if not, what do you want your legacy to be? How do you want people to remember you?
I think that does feel like a legacy. I wish it wasn't so messy.
Oh, but isn't that just the way?
It is the way. It's not the perfect narrative that I want. But yes, it is. And I think the story of my life comes through this project in a way that feels really good to me most of the time. And to be able to share the ways that I view history, the ways that I view the world, the ways that I view my friends and my family, having those captured in this way and to do it with you, that feels like a legacy. Which is the thing that I want, the thing that I'm building towards, the thing that I crave. I think this project has been able to give me a little bit.
I don't want to get sappy.
No.
But here's my resonance.
Sure.
And boys, it's so fun to be like, I'm going to do an episode and just rip off all of your bits.
Please.
Like, it thrills me so much. My resonance is that watching you do this has been a thrill, both as your friend and like, but also as someone who's just interested in the process of creating. I like to see why people create what they create and how they do it and what motivates them. And so seeing this sort of light you up in a way and make you feel like excited and passionate. And again, you know, it's been all consuming, and that has been joyous to watch, but it's also sort of put a spotlight on the gaps in my knowledge. And, we make jokes. I make jokes about being a dummy. And also the intro to the pod for the longest time was I don't care about a legacy. And that's true, but that's not really what this is about anymore. It's not so much about looking at Ancestry and trying to figure out how people will talk about me in the past. For me, it's a little bit like, what have I been ignoring? What have I been, shying away from because it's been uncomfortable? What have I been not paying attention to because I just write it off as like, well, it doesn't matter. It was back then and I'm different now. I think I even said in one of our episodes, like, I didn't need XYZ to know that, kicking a dog is a bad thing. But there's something in there that I need to really examine, which is like, yeah, that's true. You didn't need to tell me that kicking a dog was bad for me to not kick a dog. But also, there are people who will kick dogs. And mine need to maybe be able to be aware of like, wait a minute, there's something happening there. And like, what do I have that they don't that stops me from enacting harm on other people? Or what do I have that they don't that allows me to have, all of the sort of privileges that I have? And what can I share to either make people understand or to give that to other people? And I don't think I ever would have gotten there. Like we all went through some big changes in 2020 in terms of our understanding, especially as white people. But I don't think I would have gotten here in my understanding of my place in history had it not been for this love of yours and for you saying, hey, I need some doofus to sit across from me and react to my stories.
My exact words.
Those were your exact same words. And I said, sign me up. So my resonance, Karyn, is that I think the work that you're doing is invaluable.
Oh.
I think it's incredibly powerful and meaningful. And while we try to keep things light and while we do a lot of bits and while we often talk in shorthand about the shared beliefs that we have so as not to alienate or isolate anyone, I think that you are presenting knowledge to others in a way that is incredibly inviting and kind and judgment free. And I think it's something that I
don't know. There's a little bit of judgment sometimes.
You're quicker to say, now, wait, hold on. Let's hear them out in terms of trying to understand things. And I value that so much. And I'm very quick to be like, you don't agree with me? Get out of there. But I think that you've taught me patience through this. You've taught me introspection. You've also taught me to sort of wonder and be more curious and to try to understand things not as headlines or as stories that are just like, oh, this terrible thing happened today, but to look back and to understand the how, the path, the journey, how we got here. And that will inform what I do in my own actions to make sure that we are going to a better place than we have been in the past. So that's all to say. My resonance is that I love you very much.
Oh, I love you too.
I'm really glad to know what the process is like for you. And I hope that the listeners are also glad to know that and that they can appreciate how much time you take to really understand all of this, to try to deliver it to them and to me, mainly to me, and also hopefully to them if they listen, in a way that feels approachable. And I think you've done a great job of that so far.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And it's very easy for me to accept compliments. So
yeah, and so you feel super, super great.
And I feel good and I can receive it.
You can receive it. And that is...
And know that it is true.
Yeah. And you're like really feeling that deep down in your bones right now. Karyn, thank you for letting me ask you a million questions.
Thank you for wanting to ask me a million questions.
Thanks for talking at me.
Yeah. Thanks for talking back at me.
Hey, doctor.
Thanks for the conversation.
We'll come back with some more episodes like this if the listeners enjoy them. If you guys are curious about Karyn's process, we'll do some, potentially days where we're hopping on a live stream so you can do research with us in real time, ask questions. If you are related to Karyn or me and you've got some crazy stories, if we are wrong, if you think that we're dummies, if you have questions or concerns, you can reach out to us at connect@lowancestry.com. We've connected with a lot of...
If you think that we're dumb, then you can actually connect with us at gaphelpcenter@gmail.com. Think of like any other...
Why Gap?
I don't know. It was the first brand I thought of.
If you think we're dumb, you can write a strongly worded letter to elon.musk@hotmail.com.
That's perfect.
But please connect with us. We've actually talked to one of your relatives.
Yes, that's true.
Which is crazy. And I know I have a lot of family members who are interested in genealogy, and hopefully they will listen to this at some point. But we're so glad to be doing this, and I'm so glad to know you and to be part of it. And thanks for doing the good work.
Thank you for listening to my good work and giving me attention.
On that note, bye, Karyn.
Bye, Kim.
Low Ancestry is written and produced by Karyn Harding and co-hosted by me, Kim McMasters, with original music and audio engineering by Benjamin Malk. Original cover art was designed by Christina Swanson of Swansong Creative. Resources pertaining to today's episode and a link to the official bibliography can be found in our show notes or at our website, lowancestry.com. All research was conducted by Karyn, but she's been known to be wrong on occasion. So if you'd like to connect with Karyn or even send her a correction, you can email us at connect@lowancestry.com or find us on Instagram @lowancestry. Genealogy is, after all, a community effort. Thank you so much for listening, and if you like what you hear, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love to hear from you, and frankly, we really need this.